I remember a winter morning in a quiet suburb outside Chicago, when the air still held that thin layer of silence before the world wakes up. I was standing in my bathroom, the light a little too sharp, the house still half asleep, and I caught myself staring at my own reflection, not with vanity, not with criticism, but with a strange sort of question rising inside me. Who do I want to see in my actions today? It surprised me. I wasn't asking about success or reputation. I wasn't asking whether I looked tired or rested, older or younger. I wasn't measuring wrinkles or wondering about the endless expectations people place on each other. I was simply tired of living from reaction instead of intention. Tired of letting stress or distraction choose the kind of man I would be by lunchtime. And that morning became a turning point, although it didn't look dramatic in the moment. Life rarely announces its most important lessons with fireworks. More often, they slip into your day like a friendly whisper. That question stayed with me because it touched something I had always believed. I've told my students many times that people don't rise to a better life through pressure. They rise through a shift in identity. When you start feeling, deep inside, that you are meant to show kindness or courage or patience, your behavior begins to follow almost naturally. But I had forgotten to ask myself the simplest version of that truth. Who am I trying to be today? I've lived long enough to see how easily we lose ourselves. The speed of our world pulls us in every direction. A phone buzzing in your pocket can drag your attention away from someone you love. A single email can steal an entire afternoon of calm. Expectations from work, from friends, from the version of ourselves we think we should be, can crowd out the quiet voice inside that simply wants to grow. That's why this mirror question carries a strange power. It pulls you back to yourself. It asks you to choose, gently but firmly, the person you want to express through your choices. It turns identity into action. And that is where the real transformation begins. I once spoke with a young engineer in Seattle who felt overwhelmed by stress. He told me he woke up every morning feeling behind, as if the world expected more of him than he could give. He said he scrolled through his phone even before brushing his teeth, and by the time he left for work, he already felt defeated. I asked him to try one simple thing. Before looking at his phone, just stand in front of the mirror and ask who he wanted to be in his behavior for that day. Not what he wanted to achieve, not what people needed from him, just who he wanted to be. He told me something beautiful a week later. He said the first day he felt silly. The second day he forgot until he was halfway out the door. The third day he finally asked himself that question, and it felt like opening a window he didn't know existed. By the fifth day, he caught himself acting differently at work, not because he forced himself, but because he had already chosen the direction of his actions that morning. And that was only the beginning. What I love most about this small practice is how quietly it works. It doesn't require discipline worthy of a Hollywood training montage. It doesn't demand hours of reflection or an expensive planner. It asks only for a minute of honesty, and honesty is always powerful. Every time I looked in that mirror, I noticed something. My reflection didn't change much, but my sense of responsibility did. When I asked myself who I wanted to be, I could feel the gap between the person I saw and the person I hoped to see. Not a painful gap, but a motivating one, a kind of invitation. And I learned that if you face that invitation every morning, something extraordinary happens. You begin to live your days with softer edges. Your decisions become steadier. You start catching yourself before reacting in ways you regret. You pause long enough to choose. And in that pause, identity becomes action. I've always believed that people grow through small steps taken repeatedly, not giant leaps taken once. In my own life, the mirror question became a quiet rhythm, a little anchor that steadied the whole day. And the more I asked it, the more I noticed something else. It wasn't about perfection. It was about direction. Today, do I want to show patience? Today, do I want to show courage? Today, do I want to show kindness? Today, do I want to be the kind of person who listens fully? Every day the answer changed just a little, but the question stayed the same. And here's the part I didn't expect. After a while, I realized I wasn't only meeting my reflection, I was meeting my future self, the one I hoped to grow into. Those moments in the mirror became conversations with that version of me, the one who was still forming, still learning, still becoming clearer through the choices I made. The strange thing about identity is that most people think it forms in big moments, but from what I've seen, it forms in the small ones. The decision to listen instead of interrupt. The decision to take a breath instead of snapping back. The decision to speak honestly instead of hiding behind habits. The decision to forgive instead of holding on. One morning, months after I began this practice, I found myself smiling at the mirror without knowing why. Not a proud smile, not a forced smile. Just a quiet feeling that I was becoming someone I recognized, someone I liked, someone I trusted. And that, my friend, is a powerful feeling. It taught me something else. Identity is not a fixed picture. It's a living relationship with yourself. And that relationship is shaped by what you do, not just what you believe. When your everyday actions begin to reflect the person you hope to be, confidence grows naturally. Not the loud kind, the steady, grounded kind. I once told a friend in Boston that people chase confidence like it's a prize. But confidence is nothing more than the memory of your own consistent actions. When you behave like the person you want to see in the mirror, day after day, you start trusting yourself. And trust is where confidence truly begins. The mirror merely reminds you to choose. What surprised me most was how this practice softened the emotional noise of life. Instead of waking up and walking straight into stress, I woke up and walked into awareness. And awareness changes everything. When you know who you want to be today, you stop letting your emotions dictate the script. You stop being dragged around by inconvenience or irritation. You stop falling into old habits of reacting just because it's familiar. You start acting because it's intentional. There were mornings when I didn't feel like asking the question. Days when frustration or exhaustion whispered that it wouldn't matter. But I asked it anyway, and on those days, it mattered most. Because identity is created out of the days when effort feels unnecessary. That's when the foundation grows strong. And here is where the quiet magic of this practice revealed itself. The more I asked that question each morning, the less I needed to ask it during the day. Little decisions became easier. Integrity felt more natural. Even difficult conversations seemed clearer because I wasn't speaking out of impulse. I was speaking out of intention. I remember a moment in a crowded grocery store parking lot one hot afternoon. A man cut me off, parked sideways, and nearly backed into me as he rushed out of his car. A younger version of myself might have reacted sharply. But that day, the morning question was still with me. Who do I want to be in my actions today? And suddenly, I didn't want to be the man who argued in a parking lot. I wanted to be the man who stayed calm. So I let it go. And I walked inside feeling lighter. That small choice became a small proof. And proofs like that build the story of your life. Even now, when life throws me into uncertainty, I return to that mirror. Not for answers, for direction. A single, quiet moment to say, here is the kind of person I'm trying to live as. Here is the shape of my intention. And intention has a way of shaping reality. I sometimes think about how many people wake up every morning already feeling behind. Before they even leave the house, their minds are filled with noise. Work deadlines, unanswered messages, bills, the weight of yesterday's mistakes. It's as if the world hands them a script the moment their feet touch the floor. But when you stand in front of a mirror and ask who you want to be in your actions today, you gently take that script back. You remind yourself that identity is not something the world gets to assign. It's something you choose. I once sat with a young mother in a coffee shop in Denver. She had 3 kids, a full-time job, and a tiredness in her eyes that no amount of sleep could solve. She told me she was ashamed of how easily she snapped at her children when stress built up. She said she wanted to be patient. She said she wanted her kids to grow up remembering her warmth, not her exhaustion. I asked her if she had ever paused long enough in the morning to decide who she wanted to be that day. She laughed at first. She said mornings in her house felt like sprinting through a tornado. But I encouraged her to try. Just 1 minute. A quiet moment before waking the kids to look at her reflection and say, today, I want to act like a patient mother. Weeks later, she told me something that moved me deeply. She said the question didn't change her mornings overnight, but it changed the tone of her days. She felt steadier. She apologized more quickly. She caught her frustration sooner. And slowly, her children began to respond differently to her. Not because she became perfect, but because she became intentional. That's what the mirror question really does. It makes you intentional. I've watched people go through life believing that character grows out of big, heroic moments. But character grows out of the small ones, especially the ones nobody else sees. I once reminded a friend in San Diego that people admire dramatic bravery, but relationships are built on daily patience. Workplaces are built on daily integrity. Families are built on daily kindness. If you want your life to rise, let your habits rise first. Your identity becomes real when it becomes visible in your choices. There's something comforting about realizing that you don't need to change everything at once. In fact, you can't. But you can decide who you are trying to embody today. And this decision becomes a quiet compass that influences everything else. I've always believed that people underestimate the power of small beginnings. They say things like, "I'll start when life calms down." Or, I'll become stronger when the timing is right. But the timing is never perfect. Life doesn't pause to give you room for transformation. You have to transform inside the motion. And that morning question is transformation inside the motion. I remember a man I met in Atlanta, a financial analyst who felt lost in his own success. He told me he had climbed the ladder faster than he expected, only to realize he had no idea who he wanted to be at the top. He said he was living everyone else's expectations, his parents, his colleagues, even the expectations he had created for himself years earlier. His life looked polished from the outside, but inside he felt hollow. He had become a reflection of the world instead of a reflection of his own values. I invited him to try the mirror practice, not as a productivity trick, but as a way to reconnect with his inner direction. He asked himself each morning who he wanted to be in his decisions that day. Some days he chose honesty, some days courage, some days humility, some days curiosity. And little by little, he told me he felt more grounded. He felt more like himself again. He made fewer decisions out of insecurity and more decisions out of integrity. Eventually, he shifted his career path entirely, not because he was running from something, but because he finally knew what he was running toward. Identity clarifies what your heart has been whispering all along. There's a moment that still lives vividly in my memory. I was traveling on the East Coast, staying in a small hotel with a window that overlooked a quiet street lined with trees. One morning, as the sun was rising, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, still half asleep, and asked myself that familiar question: who do I want to see in my actions today? But that morning, the answer startled me. I realized I wanted to be someone who forgives. Someone who doesn't carry yesterday's frustrations into today. Someone who chooses peace over proving a point. Forgiveness is not always easy. Sometimes it feels like giving away something that the other person doesn't deserve. But forgiveness is rarely about the other person. It's about the kind of life you want to live, the kind of heart you want to carry. And that morning, I carried that intention with me. When someone irritated me later that day, someone who didn't return a call they promised, someone who forgot an important detail, I felt the morning question rise again. And immediately, I knew what to do. Not react, not tighten, not replay the irritation. Just soften. Choosing who you want to be makes you stronger than choosing how you want to appear. That is the quiet wisdom of looking into the mirror with honesty. It doesn't ask for performance. It asks for truth. There is a kind of inner alignment that happens when your behaviors begin to match the values you admire in yourself. When your outer actions reflect your inner intentions, life starts to feel less like a battle and more like a journey. And here's something I learned slowly. The mirror doesn't judge you. It doesn't shame you. It doesn't ask why you failed yesterday. It simply asks what you want to choose today. I once shared this idea with a college student in Austin who felt paralyzed by self-doubt. He said he didn't trust himself to make good decisions because he had made so many poor ones. I told him something I've learned the hard way. You don't rebuild trust in yourself all at once. You rebuild it through small consistencies, through small choices that quietly say, I'm trying, through actions that slowly redefine how you see yourself. And that's what the mirror question helps you do. It gives you a fresh starting point every single morning. There is nothing more hopeful than a new beginning. What I've noticed over the years is that when you commit to this practice long enough, something unexpected happens. At first, you're asking who you want to be today. But eventually, your actions begin to answer for you. You don't need the question as much because your days start to reflect the identity you've been choosing. That's when you know the foundation has begun to take root. And here is the remarkable part. The people around you will feel the change long before you do. They'll notice your steadiness in moments that used to shake you. They'll notice your kindness in places where you once rushed. They'll notice your patience in situations where you once reacted. Identity is not declared. It is demonstrated.
I once told a friend in Los Angeles that self-improvement is not about sculpting a perfect self. It's about revealing the better self that's already there. The mirror question simply helps you bring that version forward each morning. There's a quiet strength in living from the inside out. You're no longer chasing approval. You're no longer bending yourself into shapes that don't feel true. You're no longer trying to impress the world. You are expressing yourself instead of performing yourself. And that, my friend, is a freedom too beautiful to ignore. As this practice became part of my life, it taught me something I wish I had learned earlier. Most people wait for clarity to begin acting, but action creates clarity. Identity sharpens through behavior, and each morning you ask who you want to be. You are sharpening that identity one small moment at a time. The beauty of this practice is that it brings your future into your present. The person you hope to become begins showing up in the simplest decisions long before the world notices. And one morning, without fanfare, without applause, you look in the mirror and realize you have become someone you trust, someone you respect, someone you are proud to meet. There was a day, not too long ago, when I found myself sitting alone on a quiet bench near a small lake in Minnesota. The water was still enough to reflect the sky like a mirror. I remember thinking how much our lives resemble that surface. When the wind of emotion blows too strongly, the reflection becomes distorted. But when we pause, even for a moment, everything becomes clearer. That pause is what the morning mirror gives you. People often ask me why the smallest habits seem to create the biggest changes. I think it's because the small habits are the ones we repeat when no one is looking. They shape us quietly, like water smoothing a stone. They are not dramatic, they are not impressive, but they are honest. And honesty is where inner strength is born. I once worked with a young entrepreneur in Portland who struggled with indecision. He told me he spent his days second-guessing himself, replaying conversations, questioning every choice until he exhausted his own confidence. He said he felt like he was living behind a glass wall, watching his life instead of participating in it. When I asked him to adopt the mirror practice, he resisted at first. He said it felt too simple. But simplicity is often wisdom wearing its most comfortable clothes. He tried it anyway, and over time he learned something remarkable. When he asked who he wanted to be in his actions, the answer often gave him permission to stop overthinking. He realized he didn't need to predict the future. He only needed to choose the kind of person he wanted to be in the present. The more he trusted that, the quieter his doubts became. That is the magic of aligning identity with behavior. Your inner compass becomes louder than your uncertainty. There's a phrase I once shared with a friend. You can't outrun the person you believe yourself to be. But you can slowly reshape that belief through consistent action. When your choices match your desired identity, your self-image begins to shift. Not through force, but through evidence. You start to think, perhaps I am patient. Perhaps I am disciplined. Perhaps I am kind. Perhaps I am stronger than I thought. And once that belief takes root, your behavior follows more naturally. I remember receiving a letter from a teacher in Ohio. She said she felt invisible. She said she poured her energy into her students, her school, her family, yet rarely felt seen. She told me she was losing herself in the endless cycle of giving. And then she read about the mirror question. She tried it for one morning, then another, then another. Months later, she wrote again. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a small miracle. She said, "I look in the mirror now and see someone worthy too. Not because the world changed, but because she began showing herself the same attention she offered others. And that shifted everything." When you decide who you want to be each morning, you start treating yourself like someone who matters. I've always believed that people don't burn out from effort. They burn out from disconnection. When your actions drift too far from your values, life begins to feel heavy. But when your actions reflect the person you want to be, even a busy day can feel meaningful. This practice reconnects you with that meaning. There's a morning I'll never forget. I was staying with an old friend in a quiet town in Maine. The house was near the ocean, and the sound of waves rolled through the windows like a gentle drumbeat. I woke up early and stepped into the bathroom where the mirror was fogged from the shower he'd taken moments before. As I wiped a small circle clean with my hand, I could see only part of my face. And it struck me how often we look at ourselves through tiny windows like that. Only fragments. Only the pieces shaped by stress or fatigue or yesterday's mistakes. We forget that the whole person is still there, waiting to be seen with compassion. The mirror question widened that window for me. It allowed me to look past what was temporary and focus on what was possible. It reminded me that my identity is not defined by how I feel in the moment. It is defined by the direction I choose. And choosing is the most human thing we do. One of the most moving experiences I've had with this practice happened during a seminar in New York. A man stood up, older than most in the room, with lines on his face that told more stories than his words ever could. He said he wished he had discovered this idea earlier. He said he had lived too many years reacting to life instead of shaping it. Then he paused, took a breath, and said something that silenced the room. But I realized something. It's not too late to become the man I want to meet in the mirror. His voice cracked as he said it. And in that moment, I understood a truth I've carried with me ever since. It's never too late to change the tone of your life. Not because change is easy, but because intention is powerful. Your identity is not a photograph. It is a sunrise.
Every morning, you get another chance to bring more light into it. I've watched people transform with this idea, not because they suddenly became different, but because they became deliberate. They stopped sleepwalking through their decisions. They stopped letting old emotions write the story of their day. They stopped letting familiar habits control their future. They started living with clarity. Clarity doesn't shout, it whispers. It says, "This is who you want to be. Choose accordingly." I once told a young athlete in Phoenix that greatness is not in the medals, but in the mornings. He laughed until he realized what I meant. Every extraordinary life is built on ordinary choices repeated with intention. You don't become strong by accident. You don't become kind by accident. You don't become wise by accident. You become those things when you decide each morning to act like the kind of person who carries those qualities. And some days you won't feel like choosing. But that's when the practice works its deepest magic. When you choose the better path, even without the better mood, you strengthen the foundation of your identity. You stop being a prisoner of emotion and become a guardian of intention. I've always felt that life rewards us when we live from our better selves, not with trophies or applause, but with peace, with clarity, with a sense of quiet pride. Because when you act like the person you want to see in the mirror, you carry a different energy into the world. People feel it. You feel it. Your future feels it. One morning, standing in front of that same mirror where this journey began, I realized something beautiful. I wasn't just choosing who I wanted to be today, I was building the life that person would live. And that is where the true power lies. Identity expressed through daily action becomes destiny. And it all begins with a single, honest question asked before the world can interrupt. As I look back on the years when this simple practice became a steady companion in my mornings, I see something I never expected at the beginning. The mirror didn't just show me who I wanted to be. It showed me who I no longer needed to be.
There was a time when I used to carry the weight of old habits like invisible luggage. Impatience I didn't question. Self-criticism I treated as normal. Stress I wore like a badge of responsibility. I thought these things were simply part of who I was, part of being an adult in a busy world. But each morning question softened the grip of those habits. Not because I fought them directly, but because I kept choosing something better. You can't hold two identities at once. When you choose the one you want, the one you're tired of begins to fade, quietly and naturally. I saw this most clearly when I worked with a man in Chicago who carried anger like a second skin. Not explosive anger, more the quiet, simmering kind that hides behind sighs and short replies and a jaw that's always slightly too tense. He told me that he didn't like how he treated the people closest to him, but he didn't know how to stop. So I asked him to try one thing. Not to control the anger, not to force calm, simply to stand in front of the mirror each morning and say out loud, "Today, I want to act like a gentle man." He told me later that at first it felt like lying, but as the days passed, something began to happen. He still felt irritation rise inside him, but he didn't react as quickly. He began catching the space between impulse and action, and in that space, he found a small window of choice. That window is where transformation lives. One afternoon, he shared something I'll never forget. He said, I realized the anger wasn't who I was. It was just something I kept choosing because I'd forgotten I had other options. That is the beauty of identity-based action. It gives you back your options. I've met people all over the country who are hungry for that freedom. People who feel stuck in patterns they didn't choose consciously. People who wake up in one version of themselves and fall asleep wishing they were another. I've sat with executives who lost their sense of purpose, single parents who lost their patience, college students who lost their motivation, retirees who lost their direction. And every time I've seen the same truth. People don't need to reinvent their entire lives. They just need to remember who they want to be. The mirror question brings you back to that remembrance. There's something deeply human about seeing your own reflection and telling the truth, even if the truth is still becoming real. When you tell yourself in the morning who you want to be, you are giving your behavior a map. And even if you stray from that map during the day, you have a reference point to return to. One evening in San Francisco, after a long flight delay and a tiring day, I walked into my hotel room frustrated and impatient. I tossed my bag on the chair, loosened my tie, and caught my reflection in the darkened window. And for a moment, I felt the weight of the day pressing down, the irritation, the fatigue, the heaviness. But then, without thinking, the morning question surfaced again. Who did I say I wanted to be today? Not the man who snapped under pressure, not the man who let inconvenience shape his character. I had chosen someone calmer, more grounded, more patient. And in that moment, the irritation loosened its grip. Not because the day had been easy, but because my identity was stronger than my exhaustion. I've always believed that life gives you endless chances to become the person you're trying to be. But those chances slip by unnoticed, unless you start the day with intention. Intention makes you aware. Awareness makes you deliberate. Deliberation creates character. Character becomes the story you live. One of the most powerful things I've learned from this practice is that your identity is not built only by how you behave when life is good. It's built by how you behave when life is inconvenient. When someone disappoints you, when plans break, when emotions rise, when you're tired, stressed, rushed, unsure, or hurting. Those are the moments when the morning question returns like a quiet echo. Who do you want to be in this action? Right now, in this moment, in this choice. I once told a group in Denver something that made a few of them laugh at first. I said, if you become the person you want to be when the coffee is warm, the traffic is light, and everyone is pleasant, that's just a coincidence. But if you become that person when life is complicated, that's character. And character is what the mirror helps you build. There's a young man I met at a workshop in Miami. He told me he had grown up with a harsh inner voice. He never felt good enough, no matter how hard he worked. He said his days were filled with quiet competition against an invisible opponent he couldn't please. When he began the mirror practice, something unexpected happened. At first, he tried to choose qualities he thought he should have: strength, dominance, discipline. But after a while, he admitted to himself that what he truly wanted was to be gentle, to be compassionate, to be a man who cared more about connection than perfection. And as he lived that intention, he told me he felt a tenderness he had never allowed himself before. He said he had always feared compassion would make him weak, but instead, it made him open, present, human.
Identity is not about who the world expects you to be. It's about who your heart asks you to become.
As this practice deepened in my own life, I realized something that felt almost like a revelation. When you choose your identity each morning, you are not sculpting a new person. You are uncovering the person who has been quietly waiting behind the noise. The person shaped not by pressure, but by purpose. Your reflection slowly becomes an ally instead of a critic. And the more often you meet that ally, the more naturally your actions follow. This is where the entire practice begins to form a kind of inner architecture, a structure you can lean on, a foundation that steadies you. The question you ask each morning eventually becomes the behavior you live each afternoon. And the behavior you live each afternoon becomes the identity you trust each evening. Small choices, repeated with sincerity, create a life with integrity. And integrity is the warmest kind of strength. As I look back on all the mornings when I stood in front of that mirror, I realized that I was not just shaping my days. I was shaping the story I am now able to tell. A story not of perfection, but of persistence. Not of flawless moments, but of honest ones. A story built one quiet morning at a time. A story made possible by a single question spoken into a quiet room before the world wakes up. Who do I want to see in my actions today? Some time ago, I was walking through a quiet neighborhood in the early morning, long before the sun had fully risen. Most houses were dark, but in one of them, a single window glowed with a soft amber light. And for a moment, I wondered who was awake in that home, preparing for the day ahead. Maybe a parent, maybe a student, maybe someone sitting at their kitchen table with a cup of coffee, trying to gather enough clarity to step into another day of responsibilities. Life is full of people waking early, hoping for a fresh start, hoping to do better, to feel better, to live with a little more purpose than yesterday. And as I walked past that glowing window, I thought about how many lives could change if each person asked themselves one simple, honest question the moment they met their own reflection. Who do I want to be in my actions today? That question has the power to rebuild direction, rebuild confidence, rebuild compassion, rebuild the parts of you that the world has worn down. But the question alone is only a seed. What makes the seed grow are the quiet choices you make afterward. Each morning I return to this truth. Identity isn't created by dramatic decisions. It's created by gentle, daily agreements with yourself. Agreements that say, I will try. I will choose. I will act from intention instead of impulse. When the mornings became steadier for me, I began shaping little practices around that question, small rituals that helped me live it instead of merely thinking it. Over time, they became natural. They wove themselves into my days like familiar steps on a well-worn path. One of those practices is something I call choosing the first action. After asking who I want to be, I allow my first gesture of the day to match the identity I named. If I chose patience, I move slowly and with care. If I chose courage, I send the message I've been avoiding. If I chose kindness, I greet someone with warmth before the world distracts me. Another practice that grew out of this habit is pausing before reacting. Just one breath, One small space. In that space sits every possibility. When I pause, even briefly, I remember the morning mirror. I remember the direction I chose, and I ask myself if the next action honors that choice. Most days, the pause is enough to guide me. A third practice is something I like to call closing the loop. At the end of the day, before I turn off the lights, I stand in front of the mirror again, not for judgment, never that, but for recognition. I look at my reflection with the same compassion I tried to carry through the day, and I ask softly, did I move toward the person I wanted to be? Not perfectly, just honestly. And if the answer is no, I give myself the grace to try again tomorrow. That grace is fuel. These practices are simple, but they create a steady rhythm that shapes your inner world. Morning intention, midday awareness, evening reflection. A full circle of identity lived in real time. And here's what amazes me every time. When people commit to these small actions, life begins to soften around them. They become less reactive, more patient, more grounded. Their relationships deepen, not because they suddenly mastered communication, but because they learned to meet others from a place of chosen character rather than drifting emotion. I've watched parents grow closer to their children simply by choosing presence. I've watched couples rebuild trust simply by choosing gentleness. I've watched teams and offices work more smoothly simply by choosing respect. I've watched lonely people reconnect with their own worth simply by choosing self-compassion. Identity expressed through action becomes a force of quiet influence. Eventually, you reach a moment, sometimes after weeks, sometimes after months, when the mirror no longer feels like a question. It feels like a homecoming. You meet your reflection without defensiveness, without hurry, without dread. You recognize the person looking back, not because they are flawless, but because they are familiar in the best sense of the word. Someone you've intentionally become. And in that moment, something shifts inside you. You realize that the mirror isn't asking for an ideal version of yourself. It's asking for a sincere one. A version shaped by small courage, quiet kindness, steady integrity. You realize that every day of your life is an invitation, not to become someone else, but to become more clearly the person you were always meant to be. And that person reveals themselves through the choices you make when no one is watching but you. There is immense hope in that thought. It means your tomorrow is not determined by yesterday. It means your life is not fixed in stone. It means your heart is allowed to grow. It means identity is an ongoing creation. And every morning, you hold the brush. I've often said to friends that life rarely asks us for perfection, but it constantly invites us to show up with sincerity. When you stand in front of the mirror and ask who you want to be in your actions, you are making one of the most sincere promises a person can make to themselves. A promise to act with intention. A promise to live with direction. A promise to become someone you respect. And each time you keep that promise, even in small ways, you build a foundation strong enough to carry the weight of your dreams. There is a quiet strength in choosing your identity before the world chooses your mood. A strength that doesn't shout, but hums like a steady engine beneath the noise of life. A strength that keeps you anchored when storms rise. A strength that helps you walk through your days with your head a little higher, your heart a little calmer, your actions a little more meaningful. And as this practice becomes part of you, you will notice something extraordinary. The question you ask in the morning will begin to echo in the lives of others. Your presence will influence people without force. Your kindness will inspire without intention. Your steadiness will calm without effort. Because identity lived with integrity radiates outward, and in that radiance, people feel safer. People feel seen. People feel encouraged to choose their own better selves. Perhaps that is the quiet purpose behind all of this. Not only to become someone you admire, but to become someone who gives others permission to grow too. I hope when you stand in front of your mirror tomorrow morning, you take a moment to breathe, to see yourself not as a collection of flaws, but as a foundation of possibility. To remember that identity is not a costume you put on for the world, but a truth you express through your choices. Ask yourself gently, who do I want to be in my actions today? And let the answer guide the way you speak, the way you walk, the way you work, the way you love, the way you forgive. Let it guide the story you write with your life. Because that story is being shaped right now, in the quiet space before the day begins, in the reflection only you can see. And tomorrow's version of you is built from today's decisions. Let those decisions speak with honesty. Let them speak with courage. Let them speak with grace. Let them speak with the identity you are choosing to grow. And remember, with all the warmth I can offer, tomorrow may never come. But today is here, waiting for you to live it.